We're now heading into our annual panel discussion. So I'm delighted to welcome Professor Noel Purdy, who will be our chair for the panel discussion. And if I can also ask the members of the panel, Dr. Ciara O'Donnell, Dr. Derek Grant, Patrick Hickey, Dr. Geraldine Parks, Professor Barbara Skinner, and Sammy Taggart to join us on the stage, please.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Noel Purdy from Stranmillis University College. Delighted to be here and to be chairing this panel discussion before we finish. We've already heard across the conference, particularly from our two excellent keynote speakers, Professor Viv Ellis and Dr. Tom Walsh, that teacher professionalism over the past century and more has been and is still being shaped by what could be described as a pendulum of often conflicting forces of policy reform, marketisation, accountability and nationalism. But also that teachers and perhaps teacher educators continue to demonstrate remarkable resilience and professional creativity, even in highly controlled school contexts, where that professional creativity can, as Viv reminded us yesterday, often be sapped out of them. I think that was the word that Viv used. Our panel today brings together a suitably diverse range of perspectives from across Ireland, north and south, from policy, teacher education, research and classroom practice. We'll explore how teacher professionalism has transformed in recent times, what's shaping it now on each side of the border, because there are significant contrasts, and how we can sustain teacher identity, authenticity and agency in the years ahead. I'll first invite each of our 6 panellists to share for up to 5 minutes some opening reflections, and then we'll move into a more conversational discussion, and there will be an opportunity with the roving mic for you to ask your questions. So do have a think on the way through and do scribble down your questions, because hopefully we'll have maybe 15 minutes or so for some questions and discussion. So do have a think about those questions. They can be general questions for the panel, or they could be perhaps a specific question for an individual member of the panel. I will just run through who we've got on our panel here, but I'm sure each of them in their opening remarks will probably say a little bit more about their context. The bios, the full bios are in the conference program as well, so I'm not going to read out the full bio for each person here at all. We have, in no particular order, Dr. Derek Grant, Director of Curriculum and Assessment at NCCA. And obviously Derek has that national policy lens for us. Dr. Ciara O'Donnell, Educational Consultant and Researcher at Maynooth, who will bring that policy, the connection between policy and teacher development. Professor Barbara Skinner, down at the end, Professor of TESOL and Education at Ulster University, with a wide range of experience, and I'm just picking on one thing here, that experience of work with minority language pupils. Dr. Geraldine Parks, Senior Lecturer in Numeracy at St Mary's University College Belfast, an expert on maths mastery, but also on how student teachers can use AI to support their professional learning. Closest to me here, we have Sammy Taggart, Course Director at PGC Technology and Design at Ulster, who is an acknowledged expert in all things technological and in creating blended and balanced digital environments. And finally, last but not least, Patrick Hickey, AI educator, history and English teacher from Cork, and with a great interest in the responsible use of AI in education. And I'm sure we'll want to unpack what responsible use of AI actually means. So in that order then, I'm going to invite each of our panelists to give that 5-minute introductory sort of reflection, I suppose. We sent them the questions which are at the very start of the conference programme, and those are pretty meaty questions. But in summary, I suppose it's looking at how and why teacher professionalism has transformed, what's shaping it now, and how we sustain identity, authenticity, and agency despite the risks and the threats that we've heard lots about. Just to keep us right and to ensure that we do finish before 5 p.m. We have a timekeeper, and I'm delighted to say that my committee colleague and Southern co-chair, Julie, is sitting right in front of the panel. And she's got timekeeping signs with 1 minute and stop now. And then it's Julie's glare, and you don't want Julie's glare. So thank you, Julie, for that role. I just can't see everybody from where I am. So without further ado, we'll kick off, and I'll invite Dr. Derek Grant, Director of Curriculum and Assessment at NCCA, to provide his opening remarks. Thanks, Derek.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you here today. I suppose I'm going to begin by saying that the comments and statements that I'm going to make are very much framed within the curriculum development space, which I'm working in, and particularly with a view towards the redeveloped primary school curriculum, which was launched just last month by Minister McEntee in Dublin. So I'm going to begin by saying teaching as a profession is facing rapid change. And teaching is not only challenged by new technologies, artificial intelligence, policies, and societal expectations, but it is also enriched by what we now have as unprecedented opportunities for growth, learning, and connection. The profession today is not just about accountability and standards, it's more about who teachers are and the agency they hold in shaping education. So if we take a look at professionalism and we look at it through the lenses of identity, authenticity, and agency, beginning with teacher identity, which is at the core of professionalism, and it involves how teachers see themselves, how learners, colleagues, and wider society perceive them, and how these perspectives interact. Teacher identity is not fixed. It evolves through opportunities, experiences, and cultural shifts. So it's not a static label. It's more an evolving dynamic process. So thinking of that as process, teachers integrate personal beliefs, curriculum and pedagogical expertise with societal expectations. In doing so, they integrate professional standards with their personal values. And teachers have multiple identities as mentors, advocates, and lifelong learners, and this really strengthens the role of the teacher. If we move then to authenticity, what is it? To me, authenticity is teaching with integrity. It's bringing one's own values, beliefs, and perspectives into the classroom, and authenticity is really at the heart of meaningful teaching, with authentic teachers fostering trust, modelling lifelong learning, and building deep connections with learners. Now, that's not to say that authenticity can't be challenged by pressures for accountability, standardisation, and assessment. So really, the challenge is trying to balance authenticity with pressures for accountability. But our role is to advocate for learning environments where teachers can teach with curiosity, courage, and integrity. Authenticity requires a vulnerability. It requires teachers to admit to not having all the answers, to teaching with curiosity and enabling learners and engaging them as partners in education. But why? Why bother? Because authenticity builds stronger learner-teacher relationships. It creates environments of trust and mutual respect, and it encourages innovation and creativity in pedagogy. If we look then at the whole idea of teacher agency, agency is essential for true professionalism, because agency is the capacity of teachers to make decisions. It's the capacity of teachers to influence educational outcomes and to shape practice. So agency reframes professionalism for me as more about, it reframes to me the idea of teachers as being active and responsible rather than passive in adherence. So agency enables teachers to flourish in terms of innovation, creativity, and advocacy. And agency affords voice, and affords a voice in how education evolves. And agency really is, I suppose, supported through professional learning communities, through mentorship, and through supportive leadership. So all of these connections mean that today, when we think of professionalism, teachers are knowledge creators, cultural mediators, and societal change makers, where in this era of professionalism, teacher voice is honoured, there's trust in their expertise, and there is also opportunities for reflective agentic practice. I'll stop there, folks. Go raibh míle maith agaibh go léir.
Well done, Derek. Is that working?
Thanks, Derek. We're going to move on to Ciara, just one down from you.
Thanks, Noel.
And well done, Julie, for keeping us to time. Thank you.
Thanks, Noel. Yeah, I'm Ciara, and just a couple of sentences about myself, because I think they reflect some of the thoughts that I'm going to share over the next 5 minutes. I started my career as a primary school teacher, and in a DEIS context, continued to work in that context for about 20 years. And for 6 of that years, I held the role of homeschool community liaison coordinator, a defining moment in my career where I think I learned more about professionalism, authenticity, and being in service than I ever had before. And I was certainly a better teacher returning to the classroom after it. But most people might know me as my role in professional development, which I moved into in 2005, when I joined the support services as a seconded teacher, and I spent 8 years as National Director of the Professional Development Service for Teachers, which was Ireland's first cross-sectoral multidisciplinary support service. But just to outline a few of my reflections in advance of today's conversation. Big ideas, authenticity, agency, and identity, and all wrapped around masterfully into this area of professionalism. So I just want to take my hat off to the committee for choosing a topic that I think lends itself to a really rich conference. My first thought is, I think it's really important that that those making the big decisions about supporting these elements have a very sound understanding of what they mean in the lives of teachers. And what I mean by that is to see them through the lens of the complexity of the classroom, and to see them through the lens of teaching as a deeply human activity. For that reason, I think it's very important that any images or discourses of professionalism, agency, or any of those appendages, that we avoid discourses and images that deny the difficulty and the complexity of our work. And in that respect, I'd like to maybe later on have a few thoughts about agency in that regard. Second thing I'd like to say is that, as David said, these things are not stable in themselves, but they are subject to destabilisation and stabilisation by a number of forces. And when we talk about those constraints and those enablers, I think it's very important to look at what the ecological model that Tom spoke about earlier on, the macro, the meso, and the micro, and the synthesis between the balance of power at this level, what goes on at the situational level of the teacher, but the power of that meso role, where teacher educators in particular occupy a powerful space as the third space constructors. They negotiate those tensions between the macro and the micro. They are the boundary spanners who blur those tensions. And at the micro level, I'm particularly interested in the impact of career cycles and the professional cycles of teachers, When you look at identity, it's something that evolves throughout the duration of a career. And for that matter, for that need, we have to have an eye to teacher career cycles. What aspirations teachers have as they go through their career, because it differs. I'm particularly interested in the mid-career teachers at this space and how their identities can become destabilised by having certain aspirations and certain needs at different types of their cycle. So, and then my final point is, and I think anybody who knows me very well, professionalism, true professionalism for me, recognises the convoluted process of teacher professional learning and development. Anybody who knows me well will know how strongly I feel about the potency of professional development and learning, and not just any professional development and learning, the right kind of professional development and learning. Professional development and learning that is contextualised, that is collective, collaborative, and that is continuous. I think a system, professionalism is depleted in a system that sees professional development and learning as a short-term cost as opposed to a long-term investment. And my final thought will be on the authenticity piece. The hallmark of authenticity for me is reminding ourselves constantly that we who work with teachers, and teachers, all of us who work in education, are in service. We are servants of the frontiers. We are not functionaries, and we must resist at every opportunity to be functionaries and guard against those forces such as neoliberalism and all of those marketisation threats that loom every so often. Yeah, that's some of my thoughts. I might expand on later. No.
Okay, thanks very much. So we've had two very thoughtful and challenging reflections south of the border. We're going to head north now and on to Professor Barbara Skinner from Ulster.
Yeah, thanks everyone. I suppose I'm going to kind of zoom in on kind of changing context, which does impact teacher professionalism. So from my background working with migrant language pupils, just want to look at kind of how that is impacting on what's happening in our schools in Ireland and Northern Ireland. And, you know, there are 36 million refugees, about 6 million seeking asylum seekers. And half of this population are children, and these people are moving across the world from different cultures, different languages, different identities, crossing borders, settling in countries and in schools and classrooms that are new to them. And this has definitely impacted our systems and processes in the classroom. In Northern Ireland right now, we've got 21,352 newcomer children. That means they have English as an additional language up to B1 level. It's about 6% of the whole school population from nursery right through to sixth form. And that's compared with about 15,000 in 2018. So it's going up by about 1,000 children, young people every year. So nature of our classrooms is changing in this level. We're working in classrooms where children are moving between languages, children arriving midterm, midweek with little or no English, with no family with them. Asylum seeker refugee children are transient between schools, so they're 6 weeks in one school and then they suddenly disappear to another school. And these are children with, they're picking up English as soon as they hit the ground running, but they're also suffering from trauma of losing family and home. So, they're complex pupils, but they're also resilient and they're also very determined to belong. But we need time to give them that sense of belonging. I suppose in terms of agency, it's about teachers questioning their confidence and judgment. How do I manage these children when they're moving between languages? They're speaking Turkish when they're doing this maths problem. And then how do I know they're actually talking about what I need them to talk about? In terms of authenticity, as a teacher, you might think, how can I take care of this child who's obviously suffering? Am I actually allowed to? Am I enough to help them? And in terms of identity, teachers need to reflect on their own background, beliefs, values, really, and their unconscious bias, really, about how that might play out around expectations of newcomer children and parents' attitudes towards the newcomers' children. education. So I think the key issues in this kind of global kind of migration impact on our classrooms are the increased number of asylum seeker refugee children. English language support is needed, but so is trauma support, and there's no real integration strategy around any of that, and the newcomer pupil policy in Northern Ireland anyway seems outdated. So I'd also like to kind of think about touching on some other research I've done, which has been around managerialism and teacher professional identity, and that whole idea of, I was talking about the kind of micro level of what's happening in the classroom, but the macro level of the fact that our schools are more corporate. You know, they're driven by performativity, changes at management level, increased workload, more accountability, changes to the curriculum. All that kind of has to happen, and you know, but it does mean there's an erosion of autonomy. And the research we carried out was with, I did it with colleagues in psychology, interviews with teachers who were on sick leave due to stress and burnout. And we were trying to work out what had actually happened to them, what were the main factors that caused them to leave the profession. And we also interviewed head teachers who had experience of dealing with mental health problems among staff. And we found really that factors within managerialism really impact negatively on professional identity and can cause people to be unwell. It can impact on their well-being. And I suppose it's about this move from the public welfare idea of teaching and learning with a focus on caring relationships, that kind of commitment and passion to the profession. But now we're working in much more of a sort of business model. Teachers are measured in various ways, performativity in appraisal meetings or for promotion, external school inspection reports. And yeah, I think we found this, we found this can impact on their well-being. So that's just kind of two issues that we might want to move forward for discussion.
Thanks, Barbara. We're going to stay north of the border now. We're going to move right along to this end to Geraldine, Dr. Geraldine Parks from St Mary's University College. Geraldine.
Good morning, everybody, colleagues, friends, distinguished guests. It's a real privilege to be here at the conference today, reflecting on a new era for professionalism, teacher identity, authenticity and agency. And indeed, this time last year, my Scotens identity has changed rapidly because I was part of the doctoral roundtable. So in the advert for the National Lottery, doctoral students sitting down there this time next year, it could be you. The world of education, as we all know, is changing very rapidly, and we've heard that across the past 2 days. Barbara has talked there about the social changes we're experiencing in schools. John Anderson last night talked about digital transformation and the growing influence of artificial intelligence. But I want to also go along with what Ciara was saying in her very passionate presentation there, when Ciara talked about the complexity, but one truth remains with us. And that one truth is that at the heart of professionalism for teachers lies professional knowledge. And it's this evolving understanding that enables teachers with the appropriate professional knowledge to act with confidence, authenticity, and integrity. And it was the idea of teacher professional knowledge which came out very strongly both in my doctoral studies on maths anxiety and in my current research on promoting generative AI with student teachers. Because teacher subject knowledge builds confidence, and that confidence is strongly linked to teacher identity. In recent years, we've seen the role of the teacher changing way beyond the classroom. Just some of the things: teachers are now data analysts, as we heard in the keynote, curriculum designers, well-being advocates, and increasingly navigators of technology and a rapidly changing environment. Generative AI offers new tools for planning, assessment and communication. But we have to remember while it can process information, it cannot interpret the meaning. It can give us feedback, but it cannot nurture children's understanding. There are many, many positives that we take from the introduction of AI, but it's a tool to help with many of the tasks, to help with teacher professional knowledge, the pedagogical knowledge, curricular knowledge, relationship, and ethical. And it's these things that give depth. These tools should be used in the service of human learning, not replacing it. When teachers possess strong professional knowledge, they have professional confidence, that assurance that comes from their expertise, their critical reflection, and their commitment to continuous learning. It is that confidence that they get from professional knowledge that in turn strengthens their professional identity. Teachers see themselves, as we heard in the keynote, not as technicians following prescriptions, but as knowledge professionals capable of making judgments in very complex contexts. Authenticity in teaching is not about perfection. It's about the coherence between what we know, what we value, and how we act. And agency, it's our capacity to make informed, autonomous decisions. And that also depends on our professional confidence. Without a robust foundation of knowledge, agency becomes fragile, and with it becomes transformative. As educators, researchers, and policymakers, our collaborative challenge is to nurture and protect our professionalism. That means protecting our professional knowledge, the knowledge teachers bring, providing the time and space for reflection, collaboration, and ensuring that these new technologies enhance rather than erode the teacher expert role. So in this new era of professionalism, the question is not whether generative AI can replace teachers, but how we can ensure that teachers remain confident, knowledgeable, and empowered professionals who guide learning with both intellect and humanity. Because when professional knowledge flourishes, teacher identity is strengthened, authenticity is sustained, and agency thrives. Thank you.
Thanks, Geraldine. Another very passionate reflection there on professionalism. We're going to stay north here and come to Sammy Taggart, Course Director at Ulster University. Sammy.
Thank you, Noel. Massive privilege to be with you today and be invited to share with you on the panel. I am a teacher, educator at Ulster University, as Noel has said, and I often want to stop at the word teacher because it is in my core. And you know, that raises a question of my identity and the identity of many teacher educators, I believe. I think reflecting on the term professionalism in Northern Ireland, I think the policy versus reality positions are very interesting. In terms of our policy, we have our professional competences that really clearly define what initial teacher education might look like. We also have our broader curriculum piece in Northern Ireland, which is also fixed. And we have our learning leaders strategy, all of particular value in defining what teacher professionalism will look like. Many of those things are in a state of flux. If we look, for example, and I always talk thinking about the position of artificial intelligence, the professional competence regarding digital skills in Northern Ireland says that our teachers need to leave with capacity to use email, be able to share information appropriately. It doesn't necessarily help us to define what we need our students to understand by the time they leave initial teacher education. And I think in that changing space of AI in our schools, the whole notion of what it means to be a professional educator is questionable. But the word that really sticks out to me is agency and the role of agentic AI. And where, as teachers, do we have agency to outsource elements of our practice that may be outsourceable One of the projects that we looked at over the last number of years in Northern Ireland was a proof of concept of the deployment of AI tools in schools across Northern Ireland. And as John mentioned last night, teachers, prior to the proof of concept, were absolutely frightened to engage with artificial intelligence and how they could use it in their classrooms. They struggled with data security. But as Tom mentioned previously, this notion of a boundary spanner, C2K took on the role of that boundary spanner and allowed teachers to adopt AI technology within their classrooms in a way that enabled them to safely use these AI tools, and in doing so removed many of the challenges that teachers have. It allowed teachers to use AI to support those learners with additional educational needs. It allowed them to support a range of additional learning needs within the class. Apologies guys, I've just lost my notes. Mind moving on, no apologies.
Yeah. Will we draw it to a close there,
Yeah,
Sammy?
sorry,
Yep.
apologies.
Thanks very much to Sammy. And last but not least, and it'll be interesting to see Patrick Hickey, who's come the whole way from Cork, AI educator and teacher. Interesting to see the reflections from south of the border in relation to AI in particular. So thanks very much, Patrick.
Very good, thank you, and hugely honoured to be here today to share my insights on these vital topics. First of all, I am a current history and English teacher, so I'm very much in the wild, dealing with, as you have been yourselves, students submitting essays and projects where all of a sudden M-dashes became a thing, Americanized spelling, and, well, faculties became a thing as well. You know, that word began to be used. I suppose it's one thing to see it in a student's copy or a project, but I was at a wedding recently, and it was an old friend, I suppose. He was the last pin to fall, so to speak. But he got the notion anyway, and we were there at the wedding, and really, really looking forward to the best man speech. You know, like, we knew the crack here. You know, this is going to be good, right? Really good, really funny. No, it was a lead balloon, right? Obviously, the best man, very busy. You know, we're all of one age now. We have children, and you're on the go all the time. And I suppose different things had to be organised for the wedding. And basically, he gave the speech, but it wasn't my friend. Okay, he was parroting words that rang hollow. Now, safe to say, it's probably the only and the last best man speech he's ever going to give, hopefully, right, in this case. But I suppose if you move that analogy and talk about students, and especially young student teachers that many of you are preparing, it's not going to be a once-off occasion that they're going to be using AI. And yesterday, Professor Ellis mentioned that class in Belfast where the sweetie was up on the desk, the temptation to use it. And, like, the sweetie is there all the time when it comes to the way we use AI, our student teachers, and the students I teach also, right? And I suppose that is something we have to deal with as, in your case, education leaders. Now, everyone here in this room, I believe, is in a position to use AI to amplify their expertise and transfer that to your audience, whether it's in your lectures or your writings or whatever you're putting together for your students. In my case, I think the last 18 to 24 months, I have created teaching and learning resources that I've only dreamt of, or I put off till the summer, but those things never happen. You know, the summer happens. Articles and books I have written, the stuff of dreams. The textbooks in history I will write while I am teaching. The plan was I'd retire and write them then, but I think you You lose a lot there in translation as soon as you leave the classroom. They are going to happen. But everything I do is based on, I suppose, what Jerry called here the process, 30 years of teaching and learning, including my own learning. Unfortunately, the students and young teachers that you're working with do not have that yet. But the sweetie is there. AI can become their go-to. It is their go-to. It is their crutch. I'm fine with them, and I think most of us are, with them using it for ideas, brainstorming, resource creation, synthesis. But they're developing teacher professionalism, identity, and agency remains paramount. It remains a process. It can't, and we cannot let them fall into the trap or the hype that certain AI companies are selling these teachers every time they go on social media. I'm constantly bombarded with a new AI app for teachers that tells me that lesson plan, that PowerPoint, that resource is just a click away. If we go down that route, the lessons will be like that best man speech, parroted words that ring hollow. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Patrick. And we've had 6 really stimulating reflections from north and south of the border. I would love to open the floor now for questions from the audience. We have a roving mic to your left there. So who would like to kick off? These can be general questions on the conference theme or particular questions based on anything that any of the speakers has said. Who's going to be brave and ask the first question? John, in the middle there. Thanks, John.
Thank you very much indeed, Noel, and thank you, panel, for your thoughts there. I preface it by just saying this has been a very timely conference in terms of the content and themes. In terms of the process in Northern Ireland of breaking and remaking the curriculum, I feel armoured as a spanner in the works to go back with some arguments. But I'd like to pick up a remark made in the panel about societal expectations. Parents, carers, employers, higher education, tertiary education may be interested in what's taught and how it's taught, but at the end of the day, they're going to be most interested in assessments and qualifications. So, I'm just interested in the views of the panel about if we're producing assessments, we as educators, as teachers, are producing assessments that we believe can be answered by the learners looking up the answer in Google or on ChatGPT or Gemini or Copilot. Why are we continuing to do that? What is it going to take for us to rethink assessments in such a way that put the priority on critical thinking skills and to rethink qualifications that reflect that? And I'd be very interested in your thoughts about the impact on the future of assessment and qualifications.
Okay, thanks, John. Great question. I wonder, could we start with Patrick, who's still in the classroom teaching English and history? How do you make your assessments? Is it AI proof? Is that the right word? How do you ensure that your students are not simply putting the title into ChatGPT?
It's very simply, Noel, I suppose, homework, it's not homework anymore. And again, I picked up an English class this year, and I suppose there was a time I would say to them, you'll do an essay now for the weekend. You cannot do that anymore. I think, and I did explain this to them, that any written work will be done in class under my supervision, What will they do at home? Well, I said, my approach will be this year, you will do research, right? If we're looking at a poet, a play, a novel, you can read around that quite well at home. You have all those tools. They're, again, on your phone. But certainly, that would be my main approach. I think the days of traditional homework, you just cannot stand over it, and I don't want them to put them in a position where they have to stand over their work also. So I think it kills 2 birds with the one stone.
Okay, thanks, Patrick. Can I come to Geraldine? I was going to come to you anyway. Geraldine, what about at student-teacher level?
John, I think to answer that question, we need as a profession to look and see exactly what it is we are assessing. Because if traditionally we were assessing content, content now is on the sweetie, you know, as Patrick said, and it's so easily accessible. They're just regurgitating. It is not then showing us their understanding and their skills. And I know what we're doing in the college. We are looking at exactly what is it we're assessing and how do you go about doing that. And quite often that takes a bit more creative thinking and thinking outside the box. And I think the exam system has to change to reflect that, because if qualifications are got on regurgitating content, that doesn't show us what our teachers or our student teachers or indeed our children in the future will know. So I think there has to be a whole discussion on looking at skills rather than looking at content, and a rethink on that. That's my opinion.
Yep. Thanks, Geraldine. Any other comments from panellists? Sammy, would you like to come in on that one?
There are two images that come to mind that I've shown in a few sessions before. One's called a mechanic, if you get a chance to Google it, and the other one's called Flamingon. The mechanic was an AI-generated image that won a real-world photography competition. Flamingon was a real photograph that won a AI-generated competition, both judged by photography experts, and they were disqualified from both competitions. And experts no longer know what authentic really means in terms of a product. And that takes us then to what is an authentic process. And I think authentic processes in the term of authentic assessment doesn't particularly sit comfortably or clearly with me, in that what may be authentic for me will be very differently authentic for somebody else. And that I think is the challenge. What does a meaningful, accessible learning process look like as we move forward?
No, excellent. And I mean, the question is, have we ever had a truly authentic assessment process anyway? Is it any different from learning a pre-prepared answer, walking into an exam hall and writing it out again? That somebody else may have helped with or whatever.
But I do think that the greatest risk is to run to a 19th century solution to a 21st century problem.
Yeah, and that seems to be some of the discourse at the moment, of course, isn't it? That we're going to move back to exam halls, no coursework. Is that the solution? Is that the only answer? Barbara, do you want to come in?
I was just thinking about, we've got to think about what we're assessing, but also kind of who we're assessing. And, I was in a classroom the other day and watching a teacher who was using ChatGPT very, very quickly to adapt the written language for a test they were setting, so that it was accessible for lower levels of English language proficiency that the pupils had in the classroom. I mean, they have the knowledge to express the answers, but they can't maybe understand the questions as those questions are written. So kind of thinking it can be very useful, and I'm thinking about the way we use it in classrooms as well, and also just for translating things all the time. AI is being used in classrooms to help teachers communicate with their pupils who can't understand what they're saying. So very, effectively to a certain extent,
Yeah, thanks, Barbara. It's good to provide that balance. We'll maybe take another question at this point. We've got about 10 minutes left, so it'd be good to have time for a couple more questions. Anybody else? Yes.
I have a question for the panel about industrial action, an action sort of strike as an agentic act. For me personally, I qualified as a teacher in 2019 and entered a period of pay dispute, and my professional life as a teacher has spent more time in extended periods of action short of strike than in full teaching capacity, which is a shock to the system when in 2025 you see what actual workload looks like when the action short of strike stops. But I was wondering, we consider it, is it an agentic act of teachers taking control of that workload to focus on what they want? Is it an act of professionalism to demand the pay they think the profession is worth? Or is it a threat to professionalism, as Dr. O'Donnell has said, from this idea of being in service and then falling short in some ways of the service that one is supposed to be providing as a teacher?
That's a great question. Okay, so is it agentic for a teacher to challenge the system through action short of strike? Any panelists? Nobody rushing to answer that one.
I would say that, teachers are constantly having to value their worth to the school. They have to consider if they're being innovative enough, and if they're using AI, they've got to think, am I supporting those with high ability? Am I supporting those with English and additional language? Am I improving myself and reflecting as I'm told to reflect? Am I contributing to the excellence of the whole school that they use to promote themselves, leading Duke of Ed teams or doing all that extracurricular stuff? And I think all that can really destabilise their sense of well-being because it's so much. So, in the research study I mentioned that we did before about people who'd left or were on sick leave due to burnout and stress, they had to leave their career because it kind of mattered to them, but their identity came under threat because so much was being expected of them in terms of the standards for everything. It actually made them feel unwell. So I'm sort of thinking the action short of strike might be quite a useful place to go to if it means the teacher workforce are struggling with ill health, which sometimes they are, depending on different career stages, etc.
Thanks, Barbara. Ciara, I know you want to come in on that.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I think your question again raises the issue of understanding what agency is. And there's good agency and there's not so good agency. Agency, as Tom rightly pointed out, is very different to autonomy, although they're often confused, because autonomy is only translated, it only becomes transformative when it becomes agency. But your point there is, it raises the issue of, or raises the nature of agency as something that can be pursued in terms of self-protectionism, expansion, a need to address a goal, a need to achieve something that is bothering somebody. It's got to have that intent, it's got to have that theory of action, and it's got to have that orientation towards the future. There is something I want to achieve from this. And there's a difference, I think, in the agency that's driven from a moral and an ethical perspective of service, that I'm doing this based on the interests of my profession, the interests of children, as opposed to agency of, well, I just want to do whatever I want. And I think what your point also raises is, let's not forget that teachers have always been agentic. As soon as they close their classroom doors, their classrooms are either the open portal to enacting policy or the drawbridge to not enacting it. And exactly like Tom said, policy is just a statement of intent. Larry Cuban talks about teachers being the street bureaucrats, which kind of links a little bit to industrial action. And I don't mean in a rebellious way. I mean in a counter-culture way that is rooted in something that is noble and moral and ethical. And policy is one thing, but within the privacy of the classroom, the street bureaucrat that is a teacher bends, twists, adapts what they do because they have a solid knowledge and understanding of the students in front of them. So I would say that industrial action, or any action that's rooted in either self-protectionism or a need to be heard or a need for something different to happen, depends on whether it's rooted in that whole idea of being in service. I hope that somehow answers your question. Thank you.
Thanks, Ciara. Unless anybody else is rushing in with an answer, we'll maybe try and get another question. Yes, down at the front here. And this will probably be our last question, I'm afraid. We're under pressure of time today.
Thank you. Thanks to the panel for all their very interesting insights. So my question is that looking at the student teacher and their expectations around, on the one hand, being advocates for climate action and sustainability, and then the kind of pressures then to the digital transformation and AI and all that goes with that. How do we see their agency around their own stance on these things, but the pressure that's been put on them by the system to embrace these things, when in actual fact their own psychological contract with themselves might mitigate against that?
Another great question. Anybody like to take that one from a teacher education perspective, perhaps? Geraldine, do you want to kick off?
I think following on from the keynote, the history in teaching showed that there was always this dichotomy between teachers having to go along with what their overseers were promoting, whether that was state, church or whatever, and their own opinions. And over history, sometimes there was a lot of conflict in that. I mean, in the Northern Ireland curriculum anyway, one of the three big things on the big picture for education is that children would be taught to be responsible for the environment and for their world. So there's not as big of a dichotomy there, because that's actually in the curriculum. And if it's in the curriculum, even if teachers don't believe it's an issue, it is one of the things they have to teach. And quite often, you do have to suppress your own very strong views to teach children what's part of the curriculum. That doesn't mean that teachers aren't entitled to their own views. They are, but there has to be a balancing act between your own very passionate views and what's in the curriculum.
Thanks, Geraldine. Can I bring Derek in on that one? Just I think it'd be interesting to hear your response.
Absolutely, and I suppose we've just come through a full curriculum review and redevelopment process, where the curriculum now really is the backstop. It's the blueprint for what's going to happen going forward. I suppose thinking about a teacher's individuals, their beliefs, their values, what they hold dear, it comes from wider society as well. So it's the individual and it's the societal response. And in many ways, I suppose our system and our classrooms very much mirror what happens in wider society. And that's one of the reasons why in the Republic we have gone with that idea now of a curriculum framework as an artefact, and we've gone with curriculum specifications rather than what we would have had heretofore, more detailed statements. So it allows that opportunity for individuality. It allows that opportunity for societal shifts to happen. It allows for a progression to evolve as society changes and wider mirrors of what's happening both nationally and internationally. So I think that's why we have gone the particular route we have gone in the Republic. When we started out on our journey of redeveloping the curriculum, we were probably at a point where Brexit was happening, but we had no sense of what was coming in terms of COVID, in terms of what was coming in terms of Gaza, Palestine, in terms of what was going to happen around the Ukraine. So we have really, really taken that kind of idea on board of flexibility, agility, mobility, and so a curriculum as evolving and being a more living document. Another piece, and I think it speaks to your question there, how to reconcile all of these ideas together. We're also looking at that idea now in the Republic of cyclical curriculum review. 1999 was the last time we had a full redeveloped primary school curriculum. We're hoping we won't be waiting as long for the next iteration of what's going to become our curriculum for our primary and special schools, but also what's happening in post-primary education and preschool education. That idea of checking in with curriculum, of looking at where we're at what needs to change, at what needs to move. So that real mobility, I suppose, and agility is going to be very, very important. That idea of taking a temperature check. Because I think, as Tom pointed out, schools can't keep doing everything. Teachers can't keep adding and adding and adding. So something has to change, but the curriculum has to be able to move and mould in line with more attitudinal and wider values of society.
Thanks, Derek. And with that very forward-looking comment, I think we're going to have to draw this to a close. Unfortunately, time has beaten us. Thank you all for a very stimulating discussion. And let's give them all a round of applause too.